When the Night Comes Out presents It Wears a Face. They came from all around because it was story time. However, this time it was special. Not only was it Friday the 13th, which made it extra creepy, but Dennis was going to be there, and everyone knew he was the one with the best creepy stories. He wasn't always there during summer camp, but he had been here this year, his long, lanky frame easy to spot among the smaller campers, and he was always the most fun. Most importantly, he was the one everyone knew who did the ghost stories on the Friday before the last weekend of camp and told the best stories. The date was a coincidence, but so many of them had been going around making the soundtrack sounds from the movie franchise, the woods constantly echoed with the kill, kill, kill. Ha, ha, ha. It sort of drove the rest of the camp counselors a bit crazy, but in the end, it was good fun, and even the more veteran of them still liked to hear the stories, and of course, they all knew Dennis told the best ones. Dennis was heading into his last few years of being eligible for the head counselor at the camp. Just another year after this one, and he had skipped last year to the disappointment of that crop of campers. He was back, and everyone hoped he had a whopper of a story to tell. Dennis was so special, he also got his own cabin, which put him above everyone. The storytelling day was a tradition that went back as far as Camp Silver Lake had first existed, which was back in the late 50s. It went co-ed in the late 70s, and it turned out the girls had great stories too. Counselors gathered campers around the fire pit's stone amphitheater, built by the camp founders, and told scary stories. Some campers also told stories, and the best storyteller received a ribbon. It was summer, of course, so it seemed to take more time for the sun to go down, and everyone knew the stories would not come until it was suitably dark. So once the sun went behind the trees, with dinner in the past and the daily activities put away, they all came down with their flashlights and began to sit around the newly formed fire. Margie, the female head counselor, was there, and like tradition said, she was wearing a long black robe with a hood and a flashlight beneath her chin to be extra creepy. "Welcome, Silver Lakers. Please come in," she said in her spookiest voice. "Have a seat." They all did. Was this corny as hell? Yes. Would it be something all of them would make fun of under any other situation? Hell yes. Did any of them care? Not a single one. "I don't even want to waste another moment," Margie said. "Too late," someone called out from the audience, and everyone laughed. Margie smiled and waited. "You all know who's here," Margie credited. "It's Dennis! Let's bring him up now since none of us can follow him and none of us want to wait." Margie gave a dramatic flourish with her hand and robe, and the audience burst into applause. Dennis seemed to materialize out of the shadows at the end of the stage. He wore his own robe, and he spun with it and then bowed dramatically. Thank you. He unbuttoned the robe and tossed it into the crowd. "It's too damn hot for that," he said, and there was more laughter. Dennis was quite the sight in the firelight. All long limbs and wisps of a beard and mustache. His brown hair was always a bit of a mess, and his glasses only reflected the orange of the flames as he sat down on the stone stool where the storyteller sat. He clapped his hands loudly and then spread them as if commanding the fire. Did the fire seem to grow a little more with that, or were they all imagining? "Are you ready?" Of course they were, and said so. "Then buckle up. Stay close. Lovers, hold each other close. As this darkness enfolds us, let me tell you the most terrifying story I've ever yet come across." It was total silence now. Dennis leaned forward and began to speak. Maddie Davis was a single mom. Her daughter, Dee Dee, was 3.5 and more than advanced for her age. At times, she creeped Maddie out with how much she seemed to know and how she spoke. Her daughter was also a handful, but Maddie was doing her best and had a good job, and this allowed them to live in a nice little house bought in an up-and-coming neighborhood. The house was 2 bedrooms and needed some work, and Maddie did her best on weekends to make it more like their home. Dee Dee did her best to help too, but mostly she just ran her mouth, talking about anything and everything. The depths of her imagination never failed to amaze Maddie. As for the dad, well, that son of a bitch had run away before Dee Dee was even born. Maddie had no clue where he was now and didn't care. She had her daughter, they had their life, and things were good. Until the night Dee Dee woke Maddie up from a deep sleep, screaming, "Mommy! Mommy!" There was very little that could turn a person's blood to ice and cause them to leap into action from deep sleep to running than a child's scream. Maddie, her eyes half open, her long t-shirt hiked up too high, and her bare feet scrambling for purchase on the well-worn carpet. Damn it, she needs to replace that sometime. She ran for the bedroom. Because of the house's layout, Dee Dee's bedroom was slightly down the hall, and she staggered into a wall, reaching it in 10 seconds. Dee Dee was sitting up, her blankets and her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, eyes wide. She pointed to the wall across the way from the bed, but slightly up. Maddie turned on the lights, and Dee Dee unclutched everything and ran across her bed and into her mother's arms. Maddie held her tight, but the little girl was shaking, and the tears quickly stained her nightshirt. "What's the matter?" Maddie asked. "What's going on? Dee Dee?" Dee Dee pointed again, and this time Maddie could follow her finger. It wasn't the wall, but the vent at the top of the wall near the ceiling. It was a standard AC vent, and there was nothing there she could see. "There's a man in there!" Dee Dee screamed. "He whispered, Mommy! He whispered!" Maddie held her daughter on the edge of the bed and rocked her the way she had when she was an infant. "Shh," she said, her eyes going to the vent again and again. Nothing there that she could see. The whole vent beyond the grate would be very small anyway. Dee Dee finally calmed down and was just sniffling now. "Can I come sleep with you?" Her little girl had already been through that phase, and Maddie almost said no, but her daughter's expression was too much for her to resist. "Of course you can, baby. I just think you had a nightmare." "What was the man whispering?" "He said he had something to show me," Dee Dee said. "Sussing about a face." Maddie frowned. Well, that was weird, and not exactly what she thought she might hear. "Okay, well, we can talk more about it in the morning," Maddie said, wiping hair out of her daughter's face and then kissing her forehead. "Come on, come sleep in my bed tonight, okay?" Maddie carried Dee Dee to her bedroom, tucked them both in, and Dee Dee fell asleep on her chest. Maddie continued gently stroking her hair, but she kept staring at the ceiling. A whispering man. That was a new one. Dee Dee had had an aversion to the dark, hence her nightlight in her room. She also disliked thunderstorms, and at one time believed something was hiding under her bed. She had overcome all those fears one by one, so this was surprising and a new topic. It took a while, but eventually Maddie dozed off, her dreams troubled. Things got back to normal, for a while. Dee Dee was quiet the next morning and agreed that it was probably a bad dream. Although she seemed tired and her eyes looked heavy during breakfast, by the time she was at daycare, it seemed like all was well. She ran to the playground and was as energetic as ever. If only I had the stamina and energy of a 3-year-old, Maddie thought. And things were normal for a few days. Then suddenly, on a random Friday, Dee Dee started screaming again. Maddie had a harder time climbing out of her dream because her dream absorbed the scream, and when she finally did wake up, the world was blurry and she was groggy. When she got out of bed, she staggered, her feet not getting the message she was awake. "Mommy! I'm coming. She got moving now and was there as quickly as she could, and Dee Dee was once again clinging to her rabbit and the blanket and pointing to the wall. Her eyes were wide with terror, and tears flowed from her face. "He's back! The man! Maddie gathered Dee Dee up in her arms again and looked at the vent. Once again, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Did he whisper again? Dee Dee just nodded. I saw his eyes. You saw his eyes? Where? At the vent? Dee Dee nodded again. Yeah. Maddie frowned. Again, the nature of the nightmare was strange. This wasn't a boogeyman under the bed or ghosts in the closet. Do you want Mommy to check? Dee Dee nodded. Be careful, he's mean. Maddie gently disengaged from Dee Dee and walked across the room. Although she knew this was crazy, she couldn't help but feel dread as she padded across the thick carpeting to stand just below the vent. She peered up at it, unable to see directly in, and couldn't see anything, but there was a weird feeling inside of her. She stood on her tiptoes and tried to peer in, but the vent was still above her, and for just a moment, a fraction of a second, she thought she heard something. Breathing, maybe? Then the AC kicked on, and cool air blew into her face, and she laughed at herself. I don't see anything, sweetie, Maddie said. If he was in there, he's gone. She turned around to look at her daughter, and Dee Dee's big eyes and even bigger tears and frightened face melted her heart. She had errands to run and could sleep in a bit, so... Come on, come sleep in my room, she said. Dee Dee jumped out of bed and took her hand, and they were soon asleep under the covers. Maddie once again had a harder time falling asleep, and at one point, she was sure she heard something walking around in the house. She managed to convince herself it was all in her mind, just the house settling, and eventually, sleep took her. Once again, things went back to normal for 2 days. On the third, about 3 a.m, Dee Dee just ran into her mother's bedroom, screaming the entire way. Maddie woke up, slightly irritated now. There are times when a parent has just about enough of their kids. You love them, of course, but every human being has their breaking point. Maddie had not been sleeping well, even on the nights Dee Dee had been sleeping. Dee Dee, stop screaming, she said a little too harshly as she woke up. Dee Dee looked as if she had been slapped. She stopped dead, the look of terror on her face and eyes wide. I'm sorry, Mommy. Dee Dee slipping into that baby talk made her worried. She was always ahead of the curve on her speech, including using contractions. Maddie scolded herself as she sat up and hugged her daughter. No, baby, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have snapped. You just scared me too. Forgive me? Uh-huh. Was it the man again? Uh-huh. Did you see his eyes in the vent again? Nuh-uh. Maddie's eyes widened slightly. What did you see? Was he still whispering? I saw his face. Now Maddie pulled Dee Dee away from her chest to look in her eyes. Dee Dee, how did you see his face? He pushed his face out of the thing, Dee Dee said, pointing to the corresponding vent in Maddie's room. Mommy, it wears a face. Maddie was now totally confused. It? And what do you mean? I don't think it's a man, Dee Dee said, her voice earnest. That spooky way she had of speaking more like a woman in her 20s or 30s than someone too young for kindergarten. And it wears a face. It has a face, but it doesn't belong to it. Like a mask? Maddie asked. Like Halloween? Dee Dee nodded. Kinda, but it's real. Just not its own face. Maddie had no idea what her daughter meant, but it scared her anyway. She picked Dee Dee up and put her in bed and made sure she was snug. Eventually, despite the terror and the tears, she fell asleep. Maddie got out of bed and walked to her daughter's room. She turned on the light, but saw nothing. She once again padded over to the vent, and this time, she grabbed one of the small chairs her daughter had for a tiny desk she loved to use for drawing. Now she was face to face with the vent, and she stood on her tiptoes once again and peered into the vent. She saw only darkness. A soft breeze blew Maddie's hair back a bit. Turning her head, she put her ear by the vent and heard the air from the air conditioner. And then she heard a very slight sound that, to her, resembled a kind of sigh, or perhaps a grunt of effort, like someone trying to do something that caused them strain. It was soft, and just for a mere fraction of a second. Maddie pulled back, but quickly lost her balance on the tiny chair. The chair tipped over, and she tumbled back, hitting the backs of her knees against Dee Dee's bed, and she fell on it. She slapped her hand on her mouth so she didn't cry out, and then her eyes once again cast up to the vent. Eyes looked back at her, and she nearly screamed again. Then she blinked, and the image was gone. Maddie rubbed the back of her legs, and when she was able, she ran out of the room, closed the door behind her, and climbed back into her own bed. Dee Dee stirred but did not wake up. She pulled the blankets up to her chin and held her daughter. "Everything is okay," she whispered, and it was more for herself than her daughter. "Everything is okay." Dee Dee slept for the next 2 nights in Maddie's room, and she did not complain. Maddie was having trouble sleeping now. One night, she thought she heard something coming from her daughter's room, and then what sounded like footsteps across the floor. For a moment, her eyes barely open. She thought she saw a white face peeking around the edge of the door to her own room. She shut her eyes and counted to 10, and when she opened them wide, there was nothing. Sleep paralysis, she told herself. Eventually, Dee Dee did head back into her room, but the atmosphere within the house changed. Maddie was irritable, and she snapped more than once, then had to cradle her child in her arms and soothe her. She also snapped at work and had to apologize. Strange images of creatures with huge fangs and people hiding behind masks of human flesh filled her dreams. Finally, Maddie told Dee Dee she should sleep in her own bed. Her daughter began to cry and wail and carry on, and after days of not sleeping, Maddie had had about enough. "You need to be a big girl and sleep in your own bed," she barked. "You can't let nightmares cause you to sleep your entire life in bed with your mother." "They are not nightmares," Dee Dee screamed. "There's a thing. It wears a face." "Stop saying that," Maddie said. "You have to stop." Dee Dee began to cry, and Maddie was too tired to listen. She picked her up, and she increased her volume and began kicking. Maddie took her daughter into her bedroom and put her in the bed. "Stay in here," Maddie said. "If you close your eyes and relax, you'll go to sleep." "Mom! Mommy!" "Stop it!" Maddie yelled, her head pounding. Dee Dee stopped screaming and just cried silently, her eyes wide like something out of a Japanese anime film. Maddie instantly felt bad for what she did, for yelling, and her heart broke. Despite her abilities that made her seem older, even Maddie sometimes forgot Dee Dee was just a toddler, basically. She was young. "I'm sorry," Maddie said. "I'm sorry, baby. Please, I just haven't slept, and Mommy has such a headache. Can you at least try? Please?" Dee Dee nodded, but the hurt on her face was too intense, and Maddie still felt like the Wicked Witch. She climbed under her blankets and grabbed her bunny and turned away from Maddie, and she felt her heart break yet again. She realized she had betrayed her baby's trust in her, maybe for the first time, and she wanted to sit down and wail as well. Instead, she stayed in Dee Dee's room until the little girl was sleeping soundly, her chest rising and falling, soft snores emerging from her side of the bed. Then Maddie padded down the hall and climbed into her own bed. She felt the guilt would overwhelm her and she'd never sleep, but to her surprise, she fell right down into darkness and dreams. Until 3 a.m, on the dot. There was a scream from Dee Dee's room. Not crying. She did not call Maddie's name or cry for her mommy. There was a scream. It was short, cut off, and Maddie was awake, but her brain still hazy. Had she dreamed it? "Dee Dee?" she called out. There was nothing. Maddie swung her legs over the side of the bed. She stood up and felt dizzy for a moment. When she was steady, she walked to her door and peeked her head out into the hallway. Had she heard something then? Yes, soft, something coming from Dee Dee's room. "Dee Dee," she called out, "are you okay?" As she neared her daughter's room, she realized what it was. Dee Dee was crying. The lump under the blankets faced the wall, the covers pulled up, and the bunny barely visible over her shoulder. She was sobbing. Maddie entered the room, and a foul smell hit her. Coppery, but also sort of rotten. "Dee Dee, what happened?" Maddie asked. She continued to sob. Maddie walked to her daughter's bed and climbed into it. She reached out to touch her daughter's shoulder. It was wet. "Dee Dee, what the hell?" Maddie pulled her hand back and put it up in front of her face. Her hand was red. Maddie whipped her head around, and now the sound coming from the form she thought was her daughter was not sobbing. No, it was laughing. Terrible, horrible laughing that was far from human. The figure moved, got longer, extended its legs, and turned toward Maddie. When its head finally came around so it could look Maddie in the eye, she felt her sanity slip within her mind. Slip and then fall away. It wore a face. Her daughter's face. Blood covered the creature, and its face oozed at the edges. Dee Dee's face was too small, so the features were all stretched. It was held on via straps that Maddie thought might have been leather. "Mommy! Mommy! Mommy!" The thing wearing her daughter's face screamed and then shrieked. Its mouth opened, and dozens of sharp teeth, several rows, showed within a mouth that just kept getting bigger and bigger. Maddie screamed. She screamed and screamed and screamed. Then she saw the pile of bloody parts tucked into the corner beside the bed, and her screams managed to find a new pitch, and still the thing wearing her daughter's face kept laughing. No one breathed. Everyone was hooked on Dennis's story. He still sat on the stone, but he had somehow conveyed everything with his hands. When the neighbors heard her screaming and called the police, she was still in Dee Dee's room screaming. Her vocal cords had burst ages ago, so the scream was little more than a harsh whisper. She had gone completely insane, unable to speak. The creature wearing her daughter's face was gone, but there was a pile of severed limbs next to the bed, and her daughter's head, but missing its face. The police detective said he had never seen anything like it. Maddie just stared, her face and hands covered in blood, and to this day, she resides in a hospital for the criminally insane. Dennis paused again. The eyes bore into him. "They say if you listen closely to one of those vents, you might just hear it. Hear it whispering, telling you it wants to show you its face because it needs a new one." Another pause. "And just maybe," he said quietly. Then he leaped to his feet. "It might be yours!" The kids screamed. A few of the older ones screamed too. Then they all laughed. Dennis simply bowed to indicate he was done, and first one camper started to clap, and then the rest. Eventually, they were all clapping and roaring and stood on their feet, cheering, but all of them looking over their shoulders. Dennis had done it again. There were other stories, but no one, as predicted, matched Dennis's story. And when the campfire session broke up, another Friday the 13th was in the books. They all headed back to their dorms. They made spooky sounds and laughed. "Good one, Dennis. Great job, man." Dennis nodded and smiled and headed back to his cabin. He smiled as he closed the door, turned on the light, and got ready for bed. In the bathroom, he stared at himself in the mirror. Slowly, a smile formed. It spread wider and wider and wider until it filled his face, which shifted. Dennis reached out and carefully removed the skin he had been wearing for a while now. The face beyond would have driven anyone mad, like it had done with Maddie. Dennis, although his real name was ancient and long since forgotten, began to laugh. He showed his many teeth and tilted his head back and laughed and laughed. So many people here. So many faces.